The wind howled like a wild creature against the windows of the two-story Victorian house on Maple Street in Pensacola, Florida. Rebecca Thompson pressed her face against the cold glass, watching the palm trees bend at impossible angles under the fury of Hurricane Elias. Category 4. The meteorologist's words still echoed in her mind. Sustained winds of 150 miles per hour. Seek shelter immediately. She never should have stayed. Everyone else had evacuated, but that house. That damned house she had inherited from her parents just 6 months ago had something that kept her bound to it. Something she couldn't explain, even to herself. Rebecca was 28 years old. With brown hair she always kept in a practical bun for her shifts at Pensacola General Hospital, where she worked as an ICU nurse. She was a determined woman, known by her colleagues as someone who never gave up on a patient. But there was something about her that always seemed misplaced. A constant feeling that something important was missing from her life. If you're anxious to discover what devastating secrets the hurricane will reveal, hit the like button now, subscribe to the channel, and comment what you think the first shocking revelation will be. Your interaction helps the channel a lot. The first crash was deafening. Rebecca felt the house tremble down to its foundation as a century-old tree collapsed onto the second-floor roof. The sound of splintering wood and shattering shingles filled the air. She ran to the basement, her heart pounding so hard it seemed to compete with the thunder. Shit, 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 she muttered, descending the creaking wooden steps. The basement smelled of mold and decades of neglect. Helen and Robert Thompson, her adoptive parents, rarely went down there. In fact, they had always discouraged Rebecca from exploring the space. Another crash. This time it sounded like half the upstairs ceiling had caved in. Pieces of plaster began to fall from the basement ceiling. Rebecca shrank into a corner, covering her head with her arms. The storm outside felt like a war, but inside her mind, a different war was beginning to take shape. She had always known she was different from the Thompsons. Helen, a stern 67-year-old woman with gray hair, always pulled into a tight bun, never showed much affection. She had worked as a secretary at Pensacola City Hall for over 30 years, known for her cold efficiency and questionable methods. Robert, 2 years older, was a retired mechanic, a man of few words who spent most of his time in the garage, avoiding deep family conversations. Rebecca had never resembled either of them physically. While they had typical Anglo-Saxon features, fair skin and blue eyes, she had slightly darker skin, expressive brown eyes, and features that suggested a Latin heritage. As a child, whenever she asked about it, Helen brushed her off with a harshness that discouraged further questions. Genetics are complicated. Rebecca, you take after other relatives, was Helen's standard response, always accompanied by a look that signaled the end of the conversation. A different sound caught her attention. It wasn't the wind or falling debris. It was water. A lot of water. The sound of flooding invading the house. Rebecca looked up and saw leaks turning into small waterfalls streaming down the basement walls. Within minutes, street water began seeping up through cracks in the cement. First, just a few inches, soaking her white nurse sneakers. Then more and more, the reality hit Rebecca like a punch. She could die there. That's when the real panic began. Not fear of the hurricane, but terror that she might leave this world without ever discovering who she really was. That lifelong feeling of incompleteness grew stronger. It was as if her soul screamed that there were enormous secrets waiting to be uncovered. The water was already at her ankles when she heard the most frightening sound yet, the upstairs floor beginning to give way. Wooden beams groaned and snapped like dry branches. In moments, the weight of the second floor would collapse onto the first, and then onto the basement where she was. Rebecca ran for the stairs, but the wooden structure was already compromised. Each step groaned under her weight. When she reached the first floor, the scene was total devastation. Rain poured through gaping holes in the ceiling. Furniture floated in water that was already up to her shins. The house of her childhood was being destroyed before her eyes. But then she saw something that would change her life forever. In the corner of the living room, where the brown leather sofa Helen had always protected with plastic covers once sat, the floorboards had completely split open. The oak planks, installed more than 60 years ago, were lifted and twisted by the pressure of water and wind. And there, in a cavity she never knew existed, was something that made her heart stop. A metal box. It wasn't just any box. It was a small safe, the kind people used to store important documents. It was wrapped in plastic bags and had remained dry, protected for decades beneath the floorboards. Rebecca looked around. The house was still collapsing. She had maybe 10 minutes before the entire structure gave way. But that box? There was something about it that made every cell in her body vibrate with recognition, as if her whole life had been leading up to that moment. She knelt in the dirty water and pulled the box out. It was heavy, about the size of a shoebox, but made of sturdy metal. There was no visible lock, just a simple latch that opened easily in her trembling hands. What Rebecca found inside wasn't just documents. It was the explanation for a lifetime of unanswered questions. It was the reason she had never felt at home with the Thompsons. It was the first of 3 secrets that were about to destroy everything she believed about her identity. The first document her hands touched was a birth certificate, but not the official one she had always known, the one that listed her as Rebecca Thompson. Born March 15, 1995. Daughter of Helen Elizabeth Thompson and Robert James Thompson. This was different. The paper, yellowed with age, bore information that made Rebecca's world spin in slow motion. Child's name, Maria Esperanza Martinez. Date of birth, March 15, 1995. Mother, Linda Sofia Martinez. Father, Carlos Eduardo Martinez. Deceased location, Pensacola General Hospital, Florida. Rebecca read the document 3 times before the words made sense. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the paper into the dirty water. Linda Martinez. That name. She knew that name. Linda Martinez had worked at Pensacola General Hospital for over 20 years. She was a radiology technician at the same hospital where Rebecca worked as a nurse. They crossed paths almost every day in the hallways. Linda was a 49-year-old woman with dark hair, always tied in a ponytail, a warm smile, and a soft accent that revealed her Mexican origins. But there was more. Linda had always shown a special fondness for Rebecca, more than was normal between colleagues. She always asked about her personal life, always offered help when Rebecca seemed overwhelmed, always invited her to lunch. Rebecca had always thought Linda was just an unusually kind coworker. Now, looking at that birth certificate, a specific memory returned with devastating force. 3 months earlier, during an especially difficult ICU shift, Rebecca had a breakdown after losing a young patient. Linda found her crying in the locker room and hugged her with an intensity that felt disproportionate to the situation. Mia, Linda had whispered, using the affectionate Spanish term, "You are so strong, so special. I've always known you were special since the first day I saw you." At the time, Rebecca had thought Linda's emotional intensity was odd. Now she was beginning to understand. With her hands still trembling, she picked up the second document from the box. It was a handwritten letter, written in delicate feminine script. March 15, 2010. 15 years, Maria. My dear daughter, if you are reading this letter, it means something happened to me or that you finally discovered the truth. I don't know if I will ever have the courage to tell you in person what was done to us. You were stolen from me when you were only 6 months old. It was not a legal adoption. It was a crime. Helen Thompson was part of a network that sold babies from poor immigrant families to American families who paid a lot of money. I searched for you for years. I never stopped, but they falsified all the documents. They changed your name, your identity, erased any trail that could lead me to you. What they didn't know was that I got a job at the hospital where you were born, hoping that one day, somehow, our paths would cross again. I found you, my daughter. I found you and watched you grow all these years, pretending to be just a colleague, torturing myself every day because I wanted to hug you, tell you the truth, take you home. But I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, afraid to destroy the only life you knew, afraid you would hate me for having abandoned you, even though you were stolen from me. If you are reading this, you need to know, I never abandoned you, I never stopped loving you. Every day of the last 20 years was a struggle not to run to you and reveal everything. Your paternal grandmother died without ever meeting you. Your uncles and cousins still live in Guadalajara. You have an entire family who loves you and doesn't even know you exist. Forgive me for not being braver. With all my eternal love, Linda Sofia Martinez, your true mother. P.S. Helen Thompson was not just an accomplice. She coordinated the entire operation. Check the other documents in this box. Rebecca let the letter slip from her hands. Her knees gave out and she sank into the dirty water, sobbing in a way she never had before. It wasn't just sadness. It was rage, confusion, relief, and terror, all mixed into an emotional storm that rivaled the hurricane outside. Linda Martinez, the woman who had always treated her with special kindness, the woman who always asked about her life with a concern that went beyond professional courtesy, the woman whose eyes filled with tears every time Rebecca mentioned feeling lonely or misunderstood. Linda was her mother, her true mother, who had spent 28 years working at the same hospital, watching her stolen daughter grow up just a few feet away, unable to do anything. The house continued collapsing around Rebecca, but she barely noticed. Her hands automatically reached for the other documents in the box. There were photos of a baby who was clearly her, in Linda's arms, in a small but cozy apartment. Linda looked about 21 years old, radiant with maternal joy. There was also a document that made her blood run cold. It was a receipt for $15,000, dated September 1995, with Helen Thompson's signature. The memo read, "Final payment, Martinez case, complete documentation and custody transfer, $15,000. Helen had bought Rebecca as if she were an object, but there were more documents, many more. As Rebecca rifled through the box, she realized it wasn't just about her. There were names of other families, other babies, other transactions. Helen Thompson hadn't participated in an isolated crime. She had coordinated a systematic child trafficking operation that lasted for years. A deafening crack of splintering wood jolted her back to reality. The north wall of the house had collapsed completely. Rebecca realized she had maybe 5 minutes before everything fell. She quickly stuffed the most important documents back into the box, wrapped everything in the plastic bag, and ran for the front door. The water was already up to her knees, making every step difficult. She managed to get out of the house seconds before the second floor collapsed completely onto the first. The sound was like an explosion. The Victorian house where she had grown up, where she had spent every Christmas, every birthday, every family moment, was reduced to rubble in seconds. Rebecca stood in the flooded street, clutching the metal box against her chest, as the horizontal rain drenched her completely. In the distance, firefighter sirens approached. The hurricane was passing, but the storm in her life was only beginning, because now she knew the truth about the first secret. She wasn't Rebecca Thompson. She was Maria Martinez. Helen and Robert weren't her parents. They were the criminals who had bought her from a child trafficking ring. And Linda Martinez, the kind colleague who had always shown her special affection, was her true mother, a woman who had spent nearly 3 decades pretending to be just an acquaintance while watching her stolen daughter grow up right in front of her. But Rebecca had the feeling this was only the first secret. Linda's letter had mentioned other documents and spoke of Helen coordinating an entire operation. How many other families had been destroyed? How many other babies had been stolen? And most importantly, Helen was still alive, living comfortably in a nursing home in Mobile, Alabama. She had no idea Rebecca had discovered the truth. Yet, Rebecca looked at the destroyed house, then at the box in her hands, and made a decision that would change not only her life, but potentially the lives of dozens of other families shattered by Helen Thompson's greed. It was time for Linda Martinez to know that her daughter had finally learned the truth. It was time for Helen Thompson to pay for her crimes. And it was time for Maria Esperanza Martinez, not Rebecca Thompson, to discover who she really was and where she belonged. The hurricane had destroyed her house, but it had also revealed the first secret that would change everything. The dawn after Hurricane Elias looked like the end of the world. Rebecca, or Maria, as she now had to get used to thinking of herself, sat on the bench of an abandoned gas station on Highway 98, the metal box still clutched against her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, and her soaked clothes clung to her body like an uncomfortable second skin. Around her, Pensacola looked like a war zone. Centuries-old trees lay across destroyed cars, power lines dangled like strands of spaghetti, and debris was scattered everywhere like macabre confetti. But the physical destruction was nothing compared to the emotional chaos exploding inside her mind. She looked at her phone. 6:47 a.m. In a few hours, Linda Martinez would be at the hospital for her morning shift. Unaware that the daughter she had searched for over 28 years had finally discovered the truth, Rebecca Maria couldn't stop repeating her real name in her mind. Maria Esperanza Martinez. Esperanza, what a cruel irony that her biological parents had named her Hope, and she had spent her entire life feeling like something important was missing. She picked up the metal box and opened it again. In the daylight, the documents looked even more devastating. There were details she hadn't noticed the night before. During the chaos of the hurricane, the first additional document that caught her attention was a hand-drawn map of the Pensacola area, with several houses marked with red X's. Beside each X were Hispanic names and dates. Rodriguez family, minus $1,993, $12,000. Hernandez family, $1,994 menos $18. Gutierrez family, $1,995 menos $20. Maria, she was determined to think of herself by her true name, counted quickly. There were at least 15 families marked on that map. 15 stolen babies. 15 mothers who had spent decades searching for children, sold to wealthy American families. But there was something even more shocking. At the bottom of the box, she found a diary. A diary that clearly belonged to Helen Thompson. The handwriting was the same. Maria recognized from the notes Helen used to leave around the house when she was a child. September 3, 1995. Today we closed the Martinez baby deal. Linda Martinez is an illegal immigrant, works cleaning houses for $20 a day. She won't have the resources to hire a lawyer or investigate the disappearance of her daughter. Perfect for our purposes. Robert still has scruples about it, but $15,000 is a lot of money. And the Thompson family from Birmingham was desperate for a baby. The baby is beautiful. She'll adapt well. I arranged a job for Linda at the hospital through my contacts at City Hall. That way I can keep her close. Watch if she raises suspicion. So far, she's behaved as expected, a frightened immigrant who accepts that her child simply disappeared and doesn't ask many questions of the authorities. The business is growing faster than I expected. We already have 3 families interested in babies for next year. Maria had to stop reading. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely hold the diary. Helen hadn't just participated in the crime. She had planned everything meticulously. She had arranged work for Linda at the hospital to keep her under surveillance, to make sure the real mother never discovered where her daughter was. And the cruelest part, Helen knew Linda was in the same hospital where Maria worked. She knew mother and daughter saw each other every day. She knew Linda's suffering and fed on it. Maria closed the diary and picked up her phone. She had to see Linda. She had to look into the eyes of the woman who was her real mother and confirm what she already knew in her heart. But first, there was something she needed to do. She called Pensacola General Hospital. "Hi, this is Rebecca Thompson from the ICU. I know the hospital is closed because of the hurricane, but I need to speak with Linda Martinez urgently. It's a family emergency." The receptionist, who had known Maria for years, didn't hesitate. "Rebecca, honey, it's so good to know you're safe. We were all so worried. Linda is here helping with preparations to reopen tomorrow. She slept at the hospital last night because her house was damaged. Do you want me to transfer the call?" "Actually," Maria replied, swallowing the lump in her throat, "I'd rather speak with her in person. Can I come by?" "Of course, dear. She's in the radiology department, organizing the equipment that was damaged." Maria hung up the phone and walked through the devastated streets toward the hospital. With every step, her heart pounded harder. How do you approach someone who has spent 28 years searching for you, not knowing you were right there, just a few feet away? Pensacola General Hospital had suffered less damage compared to the rest of the city. Some broken windows, part of the parking lot flooded, but the main structure was intact. Maria knew every corridor of that place. She had worked there for 4 years, but now everything looked different. Now she knew she had been born there, that her real mother had worked there for 2 decades, waiting for a sign, any sign, that could lead her back to her stolen daughter. Maria reached the radiology department on trembling legs. Through the glass window, she could see Linda organizing damp files, trying to save documents from flood damage. Linda Martinez was 49, but looked younger, dark brown hair with a few gray strands, always tied back in a practical ponytail. Medium height, shoulders slightly hunched, from decades of physical work. Small but strong hands, always in motion. But it was her eyes that had always caught Maria's attention, expressive brown eyes that seemed to carry an invisible weight, a deep sadness she had never been able to identify. Now she knew that sadness was the pain of a mother who had lost her daughter. Maria took a deep breath and knocked on the door. "Linda, may I come in?" Linda looked up, and her face immediately lit up with that warm smile Maria knew so well. "Rebecca, oh my God, it's so good to see you're safe. I was so worried." Linda dropped the papers and quickly moved closer, as if she wanted to hug Maria, but stopped halfway, as she always did, as if there were an invisible barrier she never dared cross. Now Maria understood why Linda always hesitated before showing affection. She knew who Maria was, but couldn't reveal it. "Linda," Maria began, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you about something very important. Something about families. About mothers and daughters." Linda's expression changed instantly. The smile vanished and was replaced by something resembling panic. "What do you mean, Mia?" Linda asked, her voice almost a whisper. Maria slowly placed the metal box on the radiology table. Linda looked at the box as if it were a bomb about to explode. "I found this in the wreckage of the Thompson house," Maria said, watching every micro-expression on Linda's face. Old documents, photos, letters. Linda leaned on the table, her legs visibly weakening. "Rebecca, I don't know what you're talking about." "Mom?" Maria said softly, using the word for the first time in her life. Linda Martinez collapsed. She literally fell to her knees on the floor of the radiology department, covering her face with her hands, sobbing in a way that seemed to come from 28 years of bottled-up pain. "Maria, my girl, my baby," Linda wept, switching between Spanish and Portuguese. "I knew it was you. I always knew. Every day I looked at your face and saw myself, saw your father, saw our family. But I was so afraid you would hate me, think I abandoned you." Maria knelt beside Linda, and for the first time in 28 years, mother and daughter truly embraced. It was a hug that carried nearly 3 decades of repressed love, of unspoken words, of lost moments. Linda held Maria's face in her small hands, as if she wanted to memorize every feature. "You look just like your father," Linda whispered through tears. "Carlos would be so proud of the beautiful, strong woman you've become." "Tell me about him," Maria asked. "Tell me about my father. Tell me about our family." Linda sat on the floor, pulling Maria down to sit beside her, and for the first time in 28 years, she began to tell the true story. "Your father and I came from Guadalajara in 1994. I was 19. He was 21. We came with nothing but hope and love for each other. Carlos worked in construction during the day and studied English at night. I cleaned houses, worked in restaurants, anything to save money." Linda picked up a photo from the box, a photo of a handsome young man with dark features, holding a very young version of Linda. "When I got pregnant with you, we were so happy. We had found a small apartment. Carlos had gotten a better job. We thought we were building our American dream. You were born here, in this hospital, a beautiful American citizen. We named you Maria Esperanza because you were our hope for the future." "What happened to him?" Maria asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be painful. "Work accident," Linda said, her voice breaking. "When you were 4 months old, a wall collapsed at the site where he was working. The company said it was his fault, that he hadn't followed safety protocols. No compensation, no insurance, nothing. I was 19, alone in a foreign country, with a baby and no money." Linda paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's when they found me. Helen Thompson and her people. They said they could help. Said there were American families who could give you opportunities I never could. Said it would be temporary, just until I got back on my feet. But it wasn't temporary, Maria said. No, Mia, it was never temporary. The moment I signed those papers, I could barely read because my English was so poor they took you away. And when I went back asking for you, they said you had been legally adopted and that I had no rights. They said if I kept asking questions, they would call immigration and have me deported. Linda stood and walked to the window, looking out at the hurricane-ravaged city. So I did what I had to do. I learned English. I got my high school diploma. I became certified as a radiology technician. I fought to become legal in this country. And I got a job here, at the hospital where you were born, because somehow I knew that if I stayed close to where it all began, maybe one day I would find you again. You knew it was me, Maria said. It wasn't a question. From the first day you started working here, 4 years ago. The moment I saw you walk through that door, I knew you were my Maria Letters. You have your father's eyes, his smile. You have my stubborn chin. But more than that, a mother knows, Mia, a mother always knows. Why didn't you tell me? Linda turned, tears streaming down her face. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I'm the mother you never knew you had because you were sold to another family when you were a baby. How do you destroy someone's entire world with one piece of information? How do you tell someone that everything she believes about her life is a lie? Maria understood. It would have been an impossible conversation. So I watched you from afar, learned everything I could about you. I knew when you were stressed at work, when you were happy, when you were sad. I wanted to hug you every time you looked overwhelmed, wanted to tell you how proud I was every time you saved a patient. Wanted to cook for you every time you mentioned eating alone. The lunch invitations, Maria realized, you always invited me to lunch. I just wanted to spend time with my daughter. Linda smiled through tears. Even if you didn't know who I was. Maria picked up another document from the box, a list of names and addresses. Linda, look at this. Helen didn't just steal me. There were at least 15 other families, 15 other babies. Linda's expression hardened. I know. Over the years, I met other women like me, other mothers who lost their children the same way. We met through the immigrant community, but we never had proof, never had documentation. Helen Thompson was very careful. Well, now we have proof, Maria said, holding the box. And now we're going to make her pay for what she did. Maria Helen Thompson is dangerous. She has connections in the police, in government offices. She's not someone you want to challenge. I don't care. Maria stood, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. I spent 28 years not knowing who I was. You spent 28 years thinking your daughter was lost forever. How many other families are still suffering because of what she did? Maria walked over to Linda and took her hands. Mom, I need you to help me find the other families. I need you to help me bring justice for all of us. Linda looked into her daughters, determined. Eyes the same eyes she had seen in Maria's father, and slowly nodded. All right, Mia, but first, there's something else you need to know. Something about Helen Thompson that makes it even worse. Linda walked to her locker in the department and pulled out an old folder hidden behind medical equipment. I haven't been idle all these years. I investigated on my own, and I discovered something that will shock you. She opened the folder and showed documents that made Maria go pale. Helen Thompson didn't just coordinate baby trafficking, she also forged immigration documents. Many of the families whose babies were stolen were later deported based on falsified documents she provided to immigration services. Maria held onto the table to keep from falling. You mean, yes? After stealing our babies and selling them to wealthy families, she made sure we could never come back to look for them. It was a perfect scheme. She profited twice, first by selling the children, then by being paid by the government for providing information on illegal immigrants. Maria felt a rage she had never experienced before rise in her throat. How many families? At least 40 that I documented. 40 families destroyed forever. Linda closed the folder and looked directly into Maria's eyes. There's a network, Mia, mothers like me who meet once a month at a church in Mobile, all looking for lost children, all with stories similar to ours. If you really want justice, they need to know about these documents. When is the next meeting? Tomorrow night. But Maria, you have to understand these women carry decades of pain. Seeing you, a daughter who was found, may be both inspiration and torment for them. Maria took a deep breath. She understood the weight of what Linda was saying, but she also knew she had no choice. I need to do this. For all of us. Linda nodded and hugged her daughter again. Then we'll go together. Mother and daughter, as it should have always been. At that moment, Maria realized she had uncovered not just the second devastating secret, that Helen had systematically destroyed dozens of families, but also that her journey was only beginning. Because if Helen Thompson was still alive, if she still had powerful connections, and if there were still families searching for lost children, then Maria Esperanza Martinez had a mission. And that mission would lead her directly to the final confrontation with the woman who had stolen not only her childhood but the childhood of dozens of other children. The second secret had been revealed, but the third and most dangerous was yet to come. Our Lady of Guadalupe Church in Mobile, Alabama, seemed an unlikely refuge for such dark secrets. It was a modest red brick building, with stained glass windows casting soft patterns of light over wooden pews worn by time. The walls displayed old paintings of Mexican saints, and the smell of incense still lingered in the air even hours after the evening mass. But on Thursday nights at 7:30 p.m., that sacred space transformed into something very different, a sanctuary for broken mothers. Maria held Linda's hand as they walked down the central aisle of the church. Her palms were sweaty, and her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone in the church could hear it. In the last 48 hours, her life had been completely turned upside down. She had discovered she was not who she thought she was, that the woman who raised her was a criminal, and that her true mother had spent decades working just a few feet away, pretending to be nothing more than a coworker. Now she was about to step into a world of pain that stretched far beyond her own traumatic story. At the altar, instead of a priest celebrating mass, there was a circle of plastic chairs where about 20 women of various ages sat. Some were young, perhaps in their 30s, with faces that still carried traces of hope. Others were older, with gray hair and faces marked by decades of silent suffering. But they all shared the same expression, a mixture of desperate hope and profound sadness that came from years of searching for lost children, of sleepless nights imagining where they were, if they were safe, if they still remembered their true mothers. It was like looking into a broken mirror, where each fragment reflected a different version of the same tragedy. Linda, a woman of about 45, stood and waved energetically. It was Carmen Rodriguez, one of the founders of the group. She had dark hair tied in a simple bun, wore a faded blue blouse and jeans that had seen better days. But her eyes shone with a determination that contrasted with her modest appearance. "I thought you wouldn't come tonight because of the hurricane." The news said Pensacola was devastated. "Carmen, there's someone I want you to meet," Linda said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion and nerves. This is my daughter, Mary Letters." The silence that followed was deafening. Every woman in the circle stopped their whispered conversations and looked at Maria with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that almost resembled envy. It was as if she were an apparition, an impossibility made real. Carmen was the first to recover from the initial shock. "Your daughter. Linda, you found your daughter." Her voice was laden with emotion, alternating between joy for her friend and deep pain from her own unresolved losses. "Actually," Maria said, stepping forward and looking at each woman in the circle, "I found her. Or rather, the truth found me during the hurricane that destroyed my house in Pensacola." Maria took a deep breath and began telling her story to the group. She started with the storm, with the decision to stay in the house when everyone had evacuated, with that inexplicable feeling that something important was hidden in those walls. She described finding the metal box under the broken floorboards, the documents that revealed her true identity, and the devastating moment when she realized that Linda Martinez, the kind colleague who had always shown her special affection, was her real mother. As she spoke, she saw tears in the eyes of every woman present. Some smiled through their tears, genuinely happy that Linda had found her daughter after nearly 3 decades of searching. Others looked devastated, confronted with the reality that there was hope in the world, but perhaps not for them. It was a cruel reminder that while some miracles happened, others continued waiting indefinitely. A young woman in her 30s, with a baby in her arms, began crying silently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's just that. I also have a daughter who was taken 3 years ago. And every time I see a story like yours, I wonder if one day..." Linda stood and went over to the young mother. "What's your name, Mia?" "Sophia. Sophia Hernandez." "Sophia, never give up hope. 3 years is nothing compared to how long some of us here have waited. And look at Maria. The truth has a way of surfacing when we least expect it." When Maria finished telling her story, an older woman named Rosa raised her hand, her arthritic fingers trembling but determined. "You said Helen Thompson? The woman who works at Pensacola City Hall?" "Worked," Maria corrected. "She retired 2 years ago and now lives in a nursing home here in Mobile." The entire group seemed to tense at hearing that information. Several women exchanged looks of fear and anger. Rosa Carmen said softly, placing a hand on the older woman's shoulder, "Tell Maria about your experience with Helen Thompson." Rosa, a woman in her 60s with completely gray hair tied in a simple braid, took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "Helen Thompson stole not only my first child, but both my children," she began, her voice firm despite the obvious pain. "In 1985, when I was 22 and had been in the US from El Salvador for only 6 months, she convinced me to sign papers she said were to receive government aid, food, diapers, formula. My English was very poor at the time. I didn't understand that I was signing away custody of my son Diego to the state." Rosa paused, wiping her eyes with a crumpled handkerchief from her pocket. Diego was 8 months old. He was a chubby, happy baby, always smiling. When I went back the next week to get more help, she said he had been placed with a temporary family because someone had reported I was an unfit mother. She said it was temporary, just until I got a better apartment and a stable job. But it wasn't temporary, Maria said, her own voice breaking with emotion. "No, Mia, it was never temporary. When I went back 2 months later with a rented apartment and a night job cleaning offices, she said Diego had been legally adopted and that I had no rights over him, that I had signed papers relinquishing my custody, Rosa stood and walked over to the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe on the side wall of the church. 3 years later, I got pregnant again. This time with my daughter Sophia. I was older, wiser, spoke better English. I thought it would be different, but Helen Thompson had a long memory and an even bigger network. The church was completely silent now, except for the occasional sound of muffled sobs. When Sophia was only 2 weeks old, Helen came to my house, a small house I shared with 3 other families. She said someone had reported again that I was an unfit mother, that Child Protective Services would take the baby anyway, but that she knew a good family, a rich American family who would take good care of her. My God, Maria whispered, nausea rising in her stomach. She made me sign papers in my own kitchen, while Sophia slept in my arms. Said that if I didn't sign, they would take the baby anyway and I would be deported. She took Sophia that same night, walked out my door with my 2-week-old daughter in her arms, put her in a black car, and I never saw either of my children again. Rosa returned to her chair, aged by the memories. That was in 1988. Diego would be 38 now. Sophia, 35. They may have children of their own. They could be just a few miles away, or they could be across the country. I will never know. Carmen took over, her voice charged with controlled anger that came from years of frustration. Rosa's story is not unique. Most of us here have similar experiences with Helen Thompson or people working for her. She had a system, a very well-developed method. She always targeted young immigrant mothers. Always used our fear of the authorities against us, always exploited our linguistic and legal vulnerability. A woman named Isabella, who looked to be in her 40s and wore a janitor's uniform, spoke up. She approached me at the hospital where I worked mopping floors. Said she had seen my 3-year-old daughter with me and that she was very pretty, very smart. She said she knew a family who could give her opportunities that I never could. Private school, piano lessons, college, everything that a single mother and immigrant could never provide. Isabella paused to control her emotion. She convinced me it would only be temporary, that I could visit, that my daughter would know who I was, that when I was more financially stable, I could have her back. I signed the papers in 1992. I never saw Esperanza again. Maria felt a growing rage in her chest, an indignation that seemed to burn from within. How long did this go on? How many families were destroyed? Based on the stories we collected over the years, Isabella said, from 1982 until at least 1998, 16 years of systematic operation, and those are only the families we were able to locate and who had the courage to come to our meetings. Carmen nodded gravely. Some women are too afraid to speak. Others were deported and we never managed to contact them. Others simply gave up. The pain was too much. Folks, this story is getting more and more intense. If you're as shocked as I am by these revelations, comment below what you think will happen when Maria finally confronts Helen Thompson. And don't forget to share this video with someone who loves emotional stories. Maria took the metal box from the bag she had brought. So you all will want to see this. She placed the box in the center of the circle and began spreading the documents on the makeshift table they had formed by pushing several chairs together. Helen's diary, the meticulously organized receipts, the maps with marked locations, the list of families. The women gathered around the table like detectives examining evidence of a crime that had defined their lives. My God, Carmen murmured, flipping through the diary page by page. She documented everything, every transaction, every family, every every child. Rosa finished, her voice breaking as she held a receipt with her own name. Carmen picked up a specific page of the diary and read aloud. August 15, 1985, Rosa Morales finally signed the papers for Diego. Woman is functionally illiterate, does not understand legal English. Thompson family of Mobile offered $8,000, net profit, $6,500 after administrative expenses. Diego will be a good addition to the family, healthy baby, light eyes, will be easy to integrate. Rosa covered her face with her hands. She saw us as cattle, as baby-making machines for rich families who couldn't have children of their own. It was then that Maria noticed something she had not seen before in the documents. At the bottom of the box there was a sealed envelope with the word insurance written in red capital letters. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, carefully folded. A list of names and contact information, but these were not the names of victim families as she had expected. They were names of accomplices, a complete network of professionals who had facilitated the criminal scheme. Dr. Richard Sterling, Pensacola General Hospital. Forgery of birth certificates, $500 per document. Judge Margaret Hayes, Pensacola Family Court. Fast-tracking adoption approvals, $2,000 per case. Detective Frank Morrison, Pensacola Police. Filing of complaints, $1,000 per lost report. Sarah Collins, Child Protective Services. False neglect reports, $800 per fabricated assessment. Attorney John Patterson, Patterson & Associates. Legal documentation, $1,500 per adoption. Head nurse Betty Williams, Pensacola General Hospital. Facilitation of unregistered births, $300 per procedure. The list continued across the page. 16 names in total. a complete network of corrupt professionals in key positions who had facilitated child trafficking for nearly 2 decades. This changes everything, Linda said, looking over Maria's shoulder and reading the names with growing horror. How so? Carmen asked, moving closer to see the list. Helen was not working alone. She had accomplices in key positions throughout the judicial, medical, and child protection systems. That's why we never got justice. That's why our complaints were never taken seriously. The whole system was corrupt. Maria studied the list more closely and felt her blood run cold when she recognized several names. Some of these people are still in positions of power, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Sterling is still chief of obstetrics at Pensacola General Hospital. Judge Hayes still presides over the family court. Sarah Collins is now a regional director at Child Protective Services. Isabella suddenly stood up, knocking over her chair. Do you know what this means? It means that if we try to expose this through the normal channels, police, court, social services, they will cover it up. Again, like they always have. Not if we try, Maria said, her voice growing stronger and determined. When we try, but we won't use the normal channels. All the women looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and cautious hope. We'll go straight to the source. We'll confront Helen Thompson in person. Carmen shook her head vigorously. Maria, you don't fully understand? Helen Thompson is not just an elderly woman in a nursing home. She still has connections. She still has power over people in important positions. And more importantly, she is dangerous. Very dangerous. Dangerous how? Carmen and Rosa exchanged meaningful looks. A silent communication that spoke of shared knowledge about something terrible. Tell her about Patricia, Rosa said softly, her voice laden with deep sorrow. Carmen inhaled deeply, as if preparing to relive a painful memory. Patricia Morales was like all of us. A mother of a baby stolen by Helen Thompson in 1993, but Patricia was different from the rest of us. She was educated. She had graduated from university in Mexico before coming to the United States. She spoke perfect English, had financial resources, knew the American legal system. Carmen paused, looking at the candle flames that lit the church. In 1999, Patricia managed to gather enough evidence to sue Helen Thompson criminally. She had documents, witnesses, even a former city employee willing to testify. Her case was solid. Prosecutors said it was the strongest they'd ever seen against a child trafficking operation. What happened to the case? Maria asked, although part of her already feared the answer. Patricia was found dead in her apartment 3 days before the trial was to begin. The police said it was suicide. They said she had overdosed on sleeping pills and left a note saying she could no longer bear the pain of having lost her child. But, Maria prompted, feeling that there was more to the story. But Patricia had told us the week before that she would never kill herself without first finding her son Miguel. She said the thought that he might be looking for her was the only thing that kept her alive. She said that even if it took the rest of her life, she would never give up. Rosa spoke up, her voice trembling with outrage. Besides, Patricia was a devout Catholic. She believed suicide was a mortal sin. She would never have done that to herself. Isabella added more disturbing details. The suicide note was typed, not handwritten. Patricia always wrote by hand. She had beautiful handwriting and said it was more personal. And the pills she supposedly took, they were medications that weren't even prescribed to her. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Do you think Helen killed her? We don't have proof, Carmen said carefully. But Patricia was not suicidal, and her death was very convenient for very powerful people who would have had their careers and freedoms destroyed if her case went to trial. The group fell silent for a moment, the weight of the implications hanging over them like a heavy cloud of threat and fear. Sophia, the young mother who had cried earlier, finally spoke. So what do we do? How do we fight someone who kills those who threaten her? That's exactly what Helen Thompson wants us to feel, Maria said, standing and walking to the center of the circle. Fear, hopelessness, isolation. She wants us to believe she is untouchable, that she is too powerful to be challenged. Maria looked at each woman individually. But listen, all of you. I understand the fear. I understand the pain you've carried for decades. But I also understand something you may have forgotten after so many years of suffering and silence. She paused, letting her words gain weight. I understand the anger. And anger can be a very powerful force when channeled correctly. Linda stood beside her daughter, for the first time since they had met, showing the same kind of fierce determination Maria saw in her own eyes. What are you proposing, Mia? I'm proposing that we do what Patricia couldn't do, but this time, we won't work within a corrupt system that can be manipulated or silenced. We'll work outside it. Maria took out her cell phone and showed the group. We live in the age of social media, of viral media, of popular justice exercised through public opinion. We don't need corrupt judges or boot-off police. We don't need prosecutors who can be intimidated or bribed. We need the court of public opinion. Carmen frowned, still skeptical. You mean ... double quotes? I mean we will document everything. We will record our confrontation with Helen Thompson. We'll expose not only her, but the whole network of accomplices that allowed this to happen for so long. We'll make it so public, so viral, that they will have no choice but to act. Isabella shook her head vigorously. This is very risky, Maria. If Helen Thompson really killed Patricia, ... Do you know what's riskier? Maria replied, her voice gaining strength and passion. Letting Helen Thompson die in peace in her nursing home while dozens of families remain shattered. Letting her accomplices continue in positions of power where they can do this to other innocent families. Allowing this injustice to continue indefinitely because we are afraid to confront the truth? Rosa rose slowly, leaning on her cane. And what if she threatens us? What if she tries to harm us like she did Patricia? Then that will also be recorded and shared, Maria said with absolute determination. The only protection we have against someone like Helen Thompson is total transparency. If anything happens to us, the whole world will know exactly who was responsible. Linda placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder, feeling a mixture of pride and terror. Maria, are you sure you want to do this? Once we start down this path, there's no turning back. We'll be declaring war on very powerful people. Maria looked around the circle of women, mothers who had lost children due to the greed of a sociopath, families torn apart by a systematic criminal network, decades of silent suffering, sleepless nights, dashed hopes, and broken hearts. Mom, I spent 28 years feeling incomplete, knowing that something was fundamentally wrong in my life, but not being able to identify what it was. Now I know what it was. It wasn't just my missing true identity, it was justice. She grabbed the documents from the table and held them like sacred evidence. Helen Thompson stole much more from us than babies. She stole our ability to trust the system that was supposed to protect us. She stole our faith in justice. She stole our hope that good always triumphs over evil. She stole our belief that mothers and children cannot be separated on a whim or for greed. Maria looked directly at Linda, then at each woman in the circle, but she made a fatal mistake. She documented everything meticulously, thinking she would never be discovered, that she would always be protected by her network of corrupt accomplices. And now those documents, her own documented arrogance, will destroy her the same way she destroyed our families. The entire group seemed to be holding their breath, feeling the weight of the historic moment. So, Carmen said finally, her voice filled with a determination she hadn't felt in decades. When do we confront her? Tomorrow, Maria answered without hesitation. Before she has time to prepare, destroy additional evidence, or alert her accomplices about what we found. And if she refuses to talk to us, and if she calls security, or simply ignores us. Maria smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had found her purpose and would not be deterred. Leave that to me. I know exactly how to get Helen Thompson to talk, and I know exactly how to make sure she tells us everything, because at that moment, Maria had discovered the third and most dangerous secret of all. Helen Thompson had not only coordinated the trafficking of babies for profit, she had systematically murdered anyone who threatened to expose her. And now Maria Esperanza Martinez, no longer Rebecca Thompson, was about to become her next threat. The difference was that this time, Helen Thompson would face someone who was not alone, who did not depend on a corrupt system, and who had the most powerful weapons of the 21st century. The truth and the ability to share it instantly with the whole world. The final confrontation was coming, and after decades of impunity, Helen Thompson would finally pay for her crimes. Sunset Gardens Nursing Home in Mobile, Alabama, was everything you would expect of a pricey eldercare facility with abundant financial resources. Meticulously tended gardens stretched for acres, with paved paths winding among beds of roses, magnolias, and century-old oaks. The elegant colonial architecture, with its immaculate white columns and wraparound porches, tried to convey a sense of Southern dignity and traditional respectability. The grand entrance featured a marble lobby with crystal chandeliers and carefully restored antique furniture. It was ironic, Maria thought, as she observed the imposing facade that Helen Thompson had chosen a place called Sunset Gardens for her final years, because the sun was definitely setting on her, and Maria was about to ensure it would be a spectacular and very public sunset. It was 2:30 p.m. on Friday, exactly 72 hours after Maria had discovered the truth about her identity in the wreckage of her home destroyed by the hurricane. Linda was at her side, as were Carmen, Rosa, Isabella, and two other women from the support group, Elena Vasquez and Luz Santos. Each carried part of the documents from the metal box, organized meticulously in labeled folders for easy reference during the confrontation. Maria had 3 cell phones set up to record everything in high definition, her own iPhone 12, a Samsung Galaxy that Carmen had lent, and a Google Pixel belonging to Isabella. Additionally, Elena had brought a small GoPro camera she used to record her grandson's first steps, now configured to capture crystal-clear audio. The plan was simple on the surface, but complex in its execution. They would enter as ordinary visitors, gain access to Helen's room, and then confront her with the irrefutable evidence of her crimes. Everything would be recorded, and, if Helen confessed or threatened anyone, it would be live-streamed on social media instantly. "Remember," Maria said as they walked across the paved parking lot among Mercedes, BMWs and Cadillacs, the cars of wealthy relatives visiting their loved ones at one of Alabama's most expensive nursing homes. "Helen Thompson is a seasoned sociopath with decades of practice manipulating people. She will try to divide us, make us doubt ourselves, or intimidate us into leaving quietly." Linda held her daughter's arm, her fingers trembling slightly. "Mia, there's still time to rethink this approach. We can take the documents straight to the FBI, to the media, to some federal prosecutor who isn't on her payroll, ... double quotes. "No," Maria replied firmly, stopping in the middle of the parking lot to look Linda directly in the eye. "First, we need her recorded confession on video. We need her to personally admit what she did, to name all the accomplices, to give us information on where the other children ended up and how we can track them." Carmen nodded in agreement. "Maria is right. The documents are powerful evidence, but Helen could claim they were forged, that someone planted the box in her house, that she is being framed. A recorded confession on video is much harder to contest." Rosa, leaning heavily on her cane, added her perspective. "Also, we need her to talk about Patricia Morales. If she really ordered Patricia killed, we need that admission on record. It's the only way to make sure she pays not only for child trafficking but also for murder." They approached the main reception, where a young nurse in a light blue uniform with a professionally practiced smile greeted them. Her name tag read Jennifer Martinez, RN. Another ironic touch that did not go unnoticed by Linda. "Good afternoon, ladies. How can I help you today?" "We're here to visit Helen Thompson," Carmen said in a carefully modulated tone to sound casual and familiar. "We're old friends of hers from Pensacola." The nurse checked her computerized system, typing the name and waiting for results to appear on the screen. "Ah, yes, Ms. Thompson is in room 247. She doesn't get many visitors, so I'm sure she'll be happy to see you," the nurse said with genuine cheer. "She always mentions she'd like more company. Just sign here in the visitor log, please." Maria signed with the name Rebecca Thompson, adding granddaughter beside it. Technically, it wasn't a complete lie. Helen had raised her as a granddaughter, even if through criminal means and forged documents. The other women signed with their real names, identifying themselves as family friends. "Do you know the way, or would you like someone to accompany you?" Jennifer asked helpfully. "We know the basic layout," Carmen lied. "Is Ali, second floor, east corridor, right?" "Exactly. Elevators are to the right." "Oh, and just a reminder, visiting hours end at 4:30 p.m., so you have a couple of hours for a good conversation." 2 hours, more than enough to completely destroy Helen Thompson's life. They went up to the second floor in silence, each lost in their own thoughts and mental preparations. The elevator was elegant, with mirrors on the walls and soft classical music playing through hidden speakers. Even the elevator in this place probably cost more than most people earned in a year. The corridor was lined with luxurious beige carpet and decorated with expensive reproductions of impressionist paintings. Small mahogany tables, strategically positioned, displayed fresh floral arrangements that were clearly replaced daily. The scent of lavender and eucalyptus hung in the air, carefully masking any medicinal or aged odor that might remind visitors they were in a care facility for the elderly. It was an environment designed to be comforting and elegant, but Maria felt a growing tension with every step. Her right hand was in her pocket, fingers wrapped around her iPhone, ready to start recording the moment she saw Helen Thompson. Room 247 was at the end of the corridor, a double suite overlooking the back gardens. Maria took a deep breath, looked at each of her companions to make sure they were ready, and then gently knocked on the dark wooden door. "Come in," came a familiar voice, though visibly frailer and raspier than Maria remembered from the years Helen had raised her. Maria opened the door slowly and entered first, followed by the other women, in a formation they had discreetly rehearsed in the parking lot. Helen Thompson was seated in a wine-colored leather recliner by the panoramic window, looking out at the gardens through gold-rimmed reading glasses. At 69, she had visibly aged since Maria had last seen her at Robert's funeral 2 years earlier. But she still retained that rigid, authoritative posture Maria knew so well. Her hair, now completely gray, was pulled into a flawless bun. She wore a navy knit set that probably cost more than a nurse's monthly salary, and her nails were perfectly manicured in a soft pink shade. Even at 69 in a nursing home, Helen Thompson looked like someone accustomed to exercising power and control. "Rebecca," Helen said, turning slowly in her chair, her blue eyes still sharp despite her age. "What are you doing here? And who are these?" She stopped abruptly when her gaze found Linda. The transformation in her expression was dramatic and instantaneous, from cordial confusion to genuine shock, then recognition, and finally something that looked very much like barely concealed panic. "These people," Maria finished the sentence Helen had left hanging. "Hello, Helen," Linda said, stepping forward with a calm that contrasted drastically with the emotional turmoil Maria knew she was feeling. "It's been a long time since we last saw each other. Almost 3 decades, actually." Helen's expression changed again, the panic giving way to something more calculated and dangerous. Her eyes narrowed as she quickly assessed the situation. How many people were in her room? what the possible threats were, how she might control or escape the situation. Lina Marshini's Helen finally said, her voice regaining some of its former authority. What do you want? And why did you bring these other women into my private room? I want my daughter back, Linda replied with devastating simplicity. Helen looked from Linda to Maria, and Maria saw the exact moment the connection was made in the older woman's mind. Her eyes widened slightly, and she gripped the arms of her recliner so tightly that her knuckles turned white. No, she said, shaking her head as if she could deny reality through sheer force of will. No, that is not possible. You cannot have discovered, after all these years. Discovered what? Helen, Maria asked, discreetly turning the recording on her iPhone as she approached the older woman's chair. Discovered that you stole me from my real parents when I was only 6 months old. Discovered that you coordinated a systematic child trafficking network that operated for more than 16 years. Discovered that you intentionally destroyed dozens of families for pure financial profit. Helen tried to rise from the chair, but her legs, weakened by age and shock, failed her, and she fell back into the seat. You cannot prove anything, she said. But her voice trembled noticeably, and her hands remained clutched to the arms of the chair as if they were anchors in a storm. Maria took the diary from the folder she carried and opened it to the page she had marked with a red clip. September 3, 1995. Today we closed the deal for baby Martinez, she read aloud, her voice clear and steady. Linda Martinez is an illegal immigrant, works cleaning houses for $20 a day. She will not have the resources to hire a lawyer or investigate the disappearance of her daughter. Perfect for our purposes. The baby is beautiful. Will adapt well to the Thompson family of Birmingham. Helen's face went as white as the expensive wallpaper decorating her room. Where did you get this? She whispered, as if the diary were a ghost materialized from her criminal past. Your own handwriting, Helen, carefully hidden under the floorboards of the house you left me in your will, Maria replied, relishing the irony of the situation, along with detailed receipts, incriminating photographs, maps with locations marked, and a very interesting list of accomplices in positions of power. Carmen stepped forward and placed a stack of receipts, organized chronologically on the mahogany table beside Helen's chair. $15,000 for Maria, she said, her voice loaded with decades of suppressed pain and anger. $12,000 for my daughter Sophia in 1987. $18,000 for Rosa's son in 1985. Do you remember us, Helen? Or were we just numbers in your ledger, merchandise to be processed and sold? Helen looked at the documents spread around her like evidence of a lifetime of crimes. Then, at the women surrounding her, Maria could see her mind working quickly, evaluating her options, trying to find a way out, or at least a way to minimize the damage. Listen, Helen said, abruptly changing her approach to a softer, more manipulative tone. I know you are upset and confused, but you don't understand the full situation. I was actually helping those children, giving them opportunities and advantages that you, as single immigrant mothers without resources, could never provide. Shut up, Rosa exploded suddenly, surprising everyone with the force of her indignation. Her hands trembled as she leaned heavily on her cane. You stole my 2 children, TWO, Diego and Sofia, and then you had me deported so I could never look for them or question what you had done. Helen physically recoiled in her chair, clearly not expecting such an emotional outburst from a woman she probably still saw as a defenseless, easily intimidated immigrant. Rosa, you need to understand that the circumstances were complicated, Helen began, trying to regain control of the narrative. No, Maria interrupted firmly, stepping closer to Helen's chair. There is no explanation that justifies what you did. There is no moral or legal excuse for systematically destroying entire families. And there is definitely no justification for murdering Patricia Morales when she tried to expose your crimes. The silence that followed was so deep, Maria could hear the ticking of the old clock on the opposite wall and the distant murmur of conversations in other rooms. Helen went so pale Maria thought she might faint or have a heart attack right there. I don't know what you're talking about, Helen stammered, but her body language, the way she curled in the chair, how her eyes avoided direct contact, how her hands trembled slightly completely contradicted her words. Of course you know, Maria said, leaning in further and maintaining direct eye contact. Patricia Morales was about to expose you publicly in 1999. She had solid evidence, witnesses willing to speak, a strong legal case built over years of careful investigation, and 3 days before the trial that could have destroyed you and your network of accomplices, she turned up dead. Very convenient, don't you think? That was suicide. The police investigated thoroughly and determined, Helen protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The police you had bought? Maria produced a list of accomplices, pointing to Detective Frank Morrison's name. Like Detective Morrison, whom you paid $1,000 to file complaints away and lose evidence? Helen looked at the list of names and her expression shifted once more. This time, to something that looked almost like relief, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. You think you are very clever, don't you? She said, her voice regaining some of its previous strength as a fundamental change occurred in her demeanor. You think you can come in here, Confront me with a few old papers found by chance, and I'll panic and confess everything like an amateur criminal in a bad movie? She rose from the chair with more stability than she had shown earlier, as if she had found a new source of energy and confidence. You have no idea who you are messing with. You have no idea of the power I still hold. Even at 69 in a nursing home, you think Frank Morrison is the only cop who still owes me favors. You think Richard Sterling is the only doctor who can forge documents or alter records. You think Margaret Hayes is the only judge who can make cases vanish from the judicial system? Helen walked to the window with her back to them, looking out over the well-kept gardens as if she were a queen surveying her kingdom. Even now, after all these years, I still have more power and connections than all of you combined. I built a network that extends far beyond the names on that list you found. Oh really? Maria said, keeping her voice calm despite the rising tension in the room. Then prove it. Helen turned slowly, a cold, calculated smile spreading across her face, a smile Maria recognized from childhood. The smile Helen used when she knew she had won an argument or manipulated a situation in her favor. Very well. You want the whole truth? I'll give you the whole truth, because you are naive idiots who don't understand the consequences of what you are doing. And then Helen Thompson did something none of them had expected, something that would change the entire course of the confrontation. She began to confess everything voluntarily. Yes, I coordinated a baby trafficking scheme for 16 years. From 1982 to 1998, yes, I systematically stole children from vulnerable immigrant families and sold them to wealthy American families who paid substantial premiums for healthy, adaptable babies. Yes, I ensured that many of the biological mothers were deported or legally intimidated so they could never search for their children. Yes, and I ordered the death of Patricia Morales. She was a direct threat to the operation and the people involved, so I had her removed. I made it look like suicide because it was the cleanest, least suspicious way. Linda gripped Maria's hand so tightly she nearly cut off circulation, both of them stunned by the open, casual confession. Why? Linda asked, her voice breaking with emotion. Why are you telling us this? Helen laughed, a cold sound devoid of any humor or humanity. Because you are weak and stupid. You think a phone or video recording of a 16-year-old woman with diagnosed dementia will serve as admissible evidence in any court. Maria felt her stomach drop when she understood what Helen was implying. You don't have dementia? Of course I don't, Helen confirmed with cruel pride. But my official medical records, signed by 3 respected neurologists and a geriatric psychiatrist, all document a progressive Alzheimer's diagnosis in its early stages. If you try to use any recording of this conversation against me, my lawyers, the best money can buy, will argue that I was having a severe episode of mental confusion and that nothing I said can be considered a valid confession. Helen rose again, now fully confident and with a posture that reminded Maria of the authoritarian woman she had known in childhood. Also, do you really think I meticulously documented 16 years of criminal operations because I am a narcissistic idiot who wants trophies of my crimes? Then why? Carmen asked, though part of her already feared the answer. Because I wanted absolute certainty that if someone tried to take me down or blackmail me, I could drag everyone down with me, Helen explained with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to children. Mutual destruction insurance at its most efficient. She opened the bedside drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, yellowed with age. You saw the list of accomplices you found hidden in my house. But the list you have is only the first page of a much larger file. The complete, detailed list contains 73 names of people who participated directly or indirectly in the operation. Helen waved the envelope like a trophy. Judges in 3 different states, police chiefs, doctors in 5 hospitals, social workers, lawyers specializing in adoption, high-ranking immigration officials, and even some state and federal politicians who facilitated certain legislation or blocked inconvenient investigations. Maria looked at the envelope in growing horror, beginning to grasp the true extent of what they had uncovered. And I have detailed compromising evidence of each of their involvement. Photographs in compromising situations, bank records of payments, recordings of phone conversations, copies of signed documents, even evidence of other crimes they committed for their own benefit. Helen returned to her chair, now completely relaxed and in control of the situation. So here is the reality. You are either too young or too naive to fully understand. If you try to expose me publicly, I will expose all of them simultaneously. And do you really think 73 people in positions of extreme power, people with careers, families, fortunes, and freedoms to lose will allow that to happen quietly? Rosa stepped forward, trembling not only with age but with absolute indignation. So you are threatening us? She asked. Helen smiled again, but this time it was a smile that froze the blood of everyone present. I am not threatening anyone. I am simply explaining to you how the real world works. Some people accumulate enough power over their lives to become untouchable, and some revenges, when executed by people with sufficient resources and connections, can take decades to be fully realized. It was then that Maria realized something fundamental that completely changed her perspective on the entire situation. Helen Thompson had just admitted, on a high-quality recording, not only to multiple child trafficking crimes over 16 years, but also to premeditated homicide. And Maria had a card up her sleeve that Helen did not know existed. "You are right about one thing, Helen," Maria said calmly, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Some revenges do indeed take decades to be properly executed." She took out her iPhone and held the screen up to Helen, revealing that she was not only recording but simultaneously streaming live on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Helen Thompson's face underwent a surreal and terrifying transformation as she realized what was happening. First, genuine confusion as she struggled to process what she saw on Maria's iPhone screen. Then, absolute shock when she comprehended that she had confessed to multiple crimes on a live broadcast. Finally, a pure, cold rage that seemed to transform her into a very different creature from the apparently frail woman she had been pretending to be. "You manipulative little bitch," Helen spat venomously, lunging forward to grab the phone from Maria's hands. "Turn that off right now." But Maria was already retreating strategically, keeping the phone well out of Helen's desperate reach. On the screen, she could see that more than 1,200 people were already watching the live stream, and the number continued to climb exponentially every second. The comments were exploding. "Oh my God, is this real? Is someone calling the police? Share this now. This woman just confessed to murder live. Record everything in case she tries to take the video down." "Too late, Helen," Maria said, her voice maintaining an otherworldly calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding in the room. "Everything you just confessed has been broadcast live to thousands of people, not just to Facebook but also to Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube simultaneously through 4 different devices." Linda positioned herself protectively beside her daughter. Finally understanding the brilliance of the plan Maria had orchestrated. "You documented your own downfall, Helen. Your arrogance and need for control have just destroyed you completely." Helen looked around the room, noticing for the first time that all the women were holding phones or small cameras, all recording from different angles. It was as if she were surrounded by a team of documentarians, determined to capture every moment of her destruction. "You have no idea what you have just done," Helen said, her voice now carrying a deadly threat that made Maria recall why Patricia Morales had ended up dead. "You do not understand the consequences of what you have unleashed." Carmen stepped forward, her own phone still recording. "The only consequences we care about are that, finally, after decades, you will pay for your crimes, and that the families of all the children you stole will finally have answers." "Answers?" Helen laughed, a sound completely devoid of sanity or humanity. "You want answers? I'll give you every answer you deserve." She walked to an elegant cabinet in the corner of the room and took out a MacBook Pro that clearly cost several $1,000s. "You think you were clever broadcasting my confession live? I will show you what it really means to have power in the modern world." Helen opened the laptop and began typing quickly, her hands moving with the efficiency of someone much younger and more technically competent than she appeared. "First call," she announced, dialing a number on her personal iPhone. "Detective Morrison." "Yes." "Helen Thompson." "Yes, I know you're retired, but you still have connections. I need 5 Hispanic women arrested immediately for trespassing, making threats, and disturbing the peace. They're in my room at Sunset Gardens, attacking a defenseless elderly woman." Maria felt a chill of panic, but kept the live stream active. "Second call," Helen continued, dialing another number. "Dr. Sterling." "Helen Thompson. I need an urgent psychiatric diagnosis documenting that I'm having a severe psychotic episode today at 3:15 p.m. Yes, backdated in the system." Rosa moved closer, leaning heavily on her cane. "You're doing this live?" "Helen, thousands of people are watching you try to bribe officials and falsify medical records in real time." "So what?" Helen replied with absolute coldness. "Do you think anyone will believe you over me? Over people with decades of established reputation?" Then something unexpected happened. The door to the room opened and Jennifer Martinez, the nurse from the reception desk, entered quickly. "Mrs. Thompson, there are several police cars pulling into the parking lot, and the administrative office is getting calls from—" "Oh my God." Jennifer stopped abruptly when she saw the scene in the room: 7 Hispanic women surrounding Helen Thompson, all with phones recording, while Helen barked orders into the phone. "Jennifer," Helen said, instantly switching to the tone of a helpless victim, "thank God you're here. These women broke into my room and are threatening me. They're trying to force me to confess to crimes I never committed." But Jennifer was looking directly at Maria's iPhone, where she could clearly see the live stream and the counter showing nearly 3,000 viewers. "Mrs. Thompson," Jennifer said slowly, "I watched the live stream on my phone for the last 10 minutes. I saw you confess to child trafficking and murder." Helen's face turned gray. "Furthermore," Jennifer continued, "I'm Jennifer Martinez. Linda Martinez is my aunt, and baby Diego, the one you sold in 1985. He's my cousin. Our family has been searching for over 38 years. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of sirens approaching the building. "The irony," Maria said, keeping the cameras trained on Helen, "is that you brought Jennifer to work here without realizing. She was family to one of your victims. You literally hired your own witness." Helen sank back into her chair, seeming to age a decade in a matter of minutes. "You've destroyed everything," she muttered. "Decades of careful work, years of building relationships, a lifetime of accumulated power." "No," Linda said, stepping toward Helen for the first time in 28 years. "You destroyed everything the moment you decided to steal babies from their mothers. We just made the truth come out." The sirens were deafening now, and voices could be heard in the hallway: police officers, paramedics, and what sounded like reporters who had arrived remarkably quickly. "How did you get so much media attention so fast?" Helen asked, genuinely confused. Carmen smiled for the first time in decades. "Because Isabella works for WKRG News 5. She alerted her team to what we were planning. They were waiting outside, ready to broadcast everything live the moment you confessed." Isabella waved from the window, where a news van with massive satellite antennas was positioned in the parking lot. The door opened again, this time admitting to police officers, a team of paramedics, and 3 reporters with professional cameras. "Mrs. Thompson," one of the officers said, consulting a notepad, "I'm Detective Williams of the Mobile Police Department. We need to speak with you about some very serious charges that were broadcast live on social media." Helen made one last attempt to regain control of the situation. "Detective, as you can see, I'm an elderly woman with documented mental health problems. These women forced me to say things that aren't true." "Ma'am," the detective interrupted, "we watched the live stream. You confessed to specific crimes with details only someone with direct knowledge could know. Additionally, a preliminary search of your former home in Pensacola has already found physical evidence corroborating your confessions." Maria stepped toward the detective. "Officer, I have physical documents supporting everything she confessed to. Journals, receipts, maps, a complete list of accomplices, and I have over 40 years of records from other affected families," Carmen added. The detective nodded gravely. "Helen Thompson, you are under arrest on suspicion of child trafficking, document forgery, conspiracy, and first-degree murder. You have the right to remain silent." As Helen was handcuffed, a 69-year-old woman, formerly arrested for crimes she had committed over decades, Maria, kept streaming live. The viewer count had passed 5,000, and the comments were exploding with people sharing the broadcast and tagging national news agencies. "This isn't over," Helen said, looking directly at Maria as she was escorted out of the room. "You have no idea what you've unleashed. The people on my list will do anything to protect their secrets. Then they'd better run." Maria replied calmly, "Because in about an hour, I'll go live again reading the full list of 73 names and the specific evidence against each of them." Helen stopped at the door, flanked by officers. "You're just like your father," she spat. "Stubborn and idealistic. Look where it got him." "It brought me back to my true family," Maria replied. "And it's going to bring all the stolen children back to theirs as well." When Helen was finally removed from the room, Jennifer approached Linda with tears in her eyes. "Aunt Linda, is it really you? Mom always said you disappeared after baby Diego was taken." Linda hugged her niece, a family reunion she never expected to have. "And this," Linda said, putting her arm around Maria, "is your cousin Maria, your cousin who was stolen and whom we've just found." In the next few minutes, as police collected evidence and reporters asked questions, Maria kept the live stream running. She explained to the thousands of viewers exactly what had happened, how they had uncovered the truth, and what they planned to do next. "This was only the first phase," she said to the camera. Helen Thompson confessed to only some of her crimes, but she mentioned a list of 73 accomplices who facilitated child trafficking for decades, and were going to expose every one of them. Maria paused, looking directly into the camera with a determination she had never felt before. "For all the families who lost children, for all the children who were separated from their true families, for everyone who suffered because of this criminal network, justice is coming, and this time, it won't be silenced." The viewer count had passed 10,000 people watching simultaneously. The comments were a mix of overwhelming support, people sharing their own stories of suspicious adoptions, and others offering help to locate more victims. A woman in Phoenix commented, "My brother was adopted in 1987 from a Hispanic family in Pensacola. We always knew something was off with the documentation." A man in Chicago wrote, "I'm an attorney specializing in human trafficking cases. Please contact me. I'll work pro bono for all affected families." Dozens of national journalists were tagging Maria in the comments, asking for exclusive interviews. Detective Williams approached Maria. "Ms. Martinez, we're going to need all the physical documents as evidence for the criminal case. But first, you said you have a list of 73 accomplices." "I do," Maria confirmed, "and I'm going to make it public tonight, live, so no one can try to suppress or destroy evidence." "Ms. Martinez, I have to advise you that this could be extremely dangerous." If Helen Thompson was telling the truth about the level of power and connections these people have, Detective Rosa interrupted. Leaning on her cane but with a voice stronger than it had been in decades, "We spent 40 years being silenced by fear. 40 years accepting that some people are too powerful to be held accountable. That ends today." Carmen nodded vigorously. "Besides, now we have something Patricia Morales didn't have in 1999. We have the internet. We have live streaming. We have thousands of witnesses watching in real time. It's much harder to make people disappear when the whole world is watching. In the next 30 minutes, as the scene in the nursing home room unfolded, a storm of activity exploded on social media. Hashtag Helen Thompson confessed became a trending topic on Twitter. The live stream video was shared tens of thousands of times on Facebook. TikTok clips showing the most shocking moments of the confession were spreading virally. More importantly, other victims were beginning to come forward. Maria's phone didn't stop ringing with calls from people who had watched the broadcast and recognized details from their own experiences with suspicious adoptions. A woman from Atlanta called, crying, "I watched everything. Helen Thompson visited my family in 1989. She took my baby sister. They said it was temporary. We never saw her again." A man from Dallas wrote a long message. "I always knew something was strange about my adoption. My parents never wanted to talk about it. After seeing your live stream, I found old documents." Helen Thompson's signature is on the papers, but there were also troubling reactions. Detective Williams approached Maria again, this time with a serious expression. "Ms. Martinez, we're starting to receive calls from very powerful people demanding this investigation be handled discreetly. Some of the names on the list you mentioned are apparently already mobilizing lawyers and making legal threats." "What kind of threats?" Linda asked, instinctively shielding her daughter. "Lawsuits for defamation, claims the documents were forged, requests to have the live streams removed from platforms for violating privacy rights." Maria smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Let them sue. Let them try to take down the videos. Every legal action they take will only confirm their guilt and attract more media attention." Isabella, who had remained relatively quiet during the chaos, finally spoke. "Detective, you need to understand something about the digital age. Once something goes viral like this, it's practically impossible to make it disappear completely. The video has already been downloaded and saved by thousands of people. It's being mirrored on dozens of different platforms. Even if they managed to remove it from the main ones, it would keep circulating." One of the TV reporters approached with her camera still rolling. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Sarah Chen from CNN. We're preparing a special report on this case for prime time. Would you agree to an exclusive interview?" "Not exclusive," Maria replied. "I'll talk to every outlet that wants to cover the story. The more exposure, the better. And the list of accomplices. When exactly do you plan to make it public?" Maria looked at the clock. It was 4:45 p.m. at 8 p.m. Central Time. "I'll go live again, this time reading each name, showing the specific evidence against each person, and explaining exactly how they facilitated child trafficking." Detective Williams looked genuinely concerned. "Ms. Martinez, I must insist, this is extremely risky. Some of these people have the resources too." "To do what?" "To Patricia Morales." Maria cut him off. "Detective, with all due respect, Patricia was killed because she was working alone, depending on a corrupt system to seek justice. We are not alone, and we are not depending on the system." She gestured to the still recording cameras. "To the thousands of people still watching online, to the reporters taking notes, we're depending on total transparency and maximum public attention. It's very hard to kill someone who's constantly under the spotlight." Rosa came closer and took Maria's hand. "Mia, are you sure you want to carry this weight? Once you release that list, you'll become the enemy of very powerful people." Aunt Rosa Maria said she had decided to call all the women in the support group Aunt. "For 28 years I lived a lie. For 28 years my real mother suffered thinking she had lost her daughter forever. For 4 decades entire families were torn apart so wealthy people could buy babies and corrupt people could profit." She looked around the room, now full of police officers, reporters, paramedics, and the women who had become her new family. "If there's any risk in exposing the truth, it's a risk worth taking, because the alternative is letting this go on forever." Carmen stepped forward with her phone. "Maria, you need to see this." The live stream is being shared in Facebook groups of Hispanic mothers across the country. Hundreds of women are posting photos of children they lost, dates that match Helen Thompson's operation. Linda looked over Carmen's shoulder and went pale. "My God, there are so many families destroyed." "And that's why," Maria said, her voice gaining even more determination, "we're not going to stop with Helen Thompson. We're going to expose the entire network, every accomplice, everyone who enabled this." Detective Williams let out a heavy sigh. "All right, I'll coordinate with the FBI and state agencies to ensure you have protection during tonight's broadcast. But you need to understand, once that list is public, there's no turning back." "I don't want to turn back," Maria replied without hesitation. A young officer approached Detective Williams. "Sir, we're getting reports that 3 of the names on the preliminary list Ms. Martinez mentioned have already hired high-profile law firms, and someone is offering a $100,000 reward for information on how to discredit the accusations." Isabella laughed bitterly. $100,000. That's more money than most of our families have seen in a lifetime, and they're willing to spend it just to protect their secrets." "Exactly," Maria said, "which tells us everything about how much they have to lose and how desperate they are to keep their crimes hidden." In the next few minutes, As police finished collecting preliminary evidence and reporters conducted quick interviews, Maria received an unexpected call. "Hello," she answered, putting the phone on speaker so the live stream could capture the conversation. "Ms. Martinez, this is Federal Agent James Cooper from the FBI. We've been monitoring the situation since your broadcast went viral. I need to speak with you urgently about the security of your operation tonight, Agent Cooper. I have the phone on speaker and I'm streaming live. Anything you want to say can be said publicly." There was a pause on the other end. "Ms. Martinez, we've received credible information that people on the list you plan to expose are taking extreme measures to stop tonight's broadcast. We strongly recommend you work with us through official channels instead of—" "Agent Cooper," Maria interrupted him, with all due respect. "Official channels are exactly how Helen Thompson operated for decades without being caught. How many people in the FBI are on this list of 73 names?" Another pause, longer this time. "I can't answer that question publicly." "Then you just did," Maria said. "If no one in the FBI was on the list, you could answer easily. The fact that you can't tells us there is." Detective Williams stepped toward the phone. "Agent Cooper, this is Detective Williams from MPD. We're providing local protection for Ms. Martinez and her family. What specific threats have you identified?" "Detective, this needs to be discussed through secure channels." "No," Maria said firmly. "No more secure channels. Everything public, everything transparent, everything recorded. It's the only way to make sure no one is silenced or disappears mysteriously." She hung up the phone and looked at the still recording cameras. "People watching, you saw that. The FBI is trying to convince me to work through official channels, the same official channels that allowed Helen Thompson to operate for decades. That's exactly why we're going to keep doing everything publicly." The viewer count had passed 15,000 people watching simultaneously. The comments were exploding. "Don't trust the FBI. Keep everything public. We're recording everything in case something happens to you. You're a hero." But there were also worrying comments. "Be careful. They'll try to silence you. Patricia Morales thought she was safe to you. Need to hide until tonight's broadcast." Maria read some of the comments aloud, then looked directly into the camera. "I know many of you are worried about my safety. So am I. But here's the truth. If something happens to me between now and 8 p.m., you'll know exactly who was responsible. And the list will be released automatically." She held up a sealed envelope to the camera. "This envelope contains copies of all the documents and the full list of 73 names. It's set to be sent automatically to 20 different journalists if I don't confirm my safety every 2 hours." Detective Williams looked impressed. "That's really well thought out. I learned from Patricia Morales' mistakes," Maria replied. "She tried to work within the system and died for it. I'm working outside the system and taking every precaution possible." It was 5:15 p.m. in less than 3 hours. Maria would go live again, this time exposing a network of corruption spanning decades and involving some of the most powerful people in 3 states. She looked at Linda, at the women who had become her new family, at the reporters documenting every moment, and at the cameras streaming to thousands of people across the country. At 8 p.m., the full truth will be released. And after that, whatever happens, at least the whole world will know what happened to hundreds of shattered families. "And if someone tries to stop us?" Carmen asked. Maria smiled, this time with genuine confidence. "Then they'll have to stop us in front of tens of thousands of witnesses. And that, in itself, will be the greatest confession of guilt they could make." The livestream continued, documenting every moment until the final confrontation that would take place in just a few hours. A confrontation that would change not only Maria's life and her family's, but potentially the fate of hundreds of stolen children and their families who had spent decades searching for one another. The truth was about to be fully unleashed, and this time, no one would be able to silence her. So, folks, what did you think of this story? Leave in the comments what you would do in the place of each character. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want more emotional stories like this one.